1965. New York wasn't just a city, it was a pressure cooker with the lid about to blow. The civil rights movement had cracked America's foundation, and Harlem streets pulsed with unease, like the sky before lightning. In this storm stood one man, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. To the NYPD, he was a reign of terror in a fine suit, a kingpin pulling the strings of Harlem's underworld. But to his people, he wasn't just a gangster. He was a shield, a pillar, a complicated hero in a crooked world that wanted him buried. But then came Julian Westbrook, the golden face of the evening news. Regal in blazer and bias, he wasn't just New York media, he was media, a sharp-chinned monument of old money and calculated charm. Suburbanites clung to his every word as gospel, but beneath his smooth voice was that familiar rot racism, not in burning crosses, but in smirks, masked as questions and superiority dressed in civility. And Westbrook had an idea, a brilliant, dangerous one. The network's ratings were dying. Raw, younger broadcasts were pulling viewers away. So, Westbrook hatched a plan, one so cruel it gleamed. He wanted spectacle. He wanted Bumpy Johnson not behind bars but dismantled live in front of 3 million viewers. His goal? Drag the myth into the daylight, twist it into parody, and end Bumpy's legend once and for all. To his bosses, he called it public service. Behind closed doors, swirling whiskey in a glass and grinning like a wolf, he said it to his producer plainly, "I'm going to break him. He'll lose his cool, and once the world sees what he really is, the cops will get the green light to bury him forever." This wasn't going to be an interview. It was going to be a televised assassination attempt, with Westbrook pulling the trigger. When the invitation landed at Bumpy Johnson's Lenox Terrace apartment, his men didn't even have to read it to know what it was. Every instinct screamed trap, the kind wrapped in polite words and printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock. Elegant, yes, but laced with venom. Whispers, Bumpy's right-hand man for decades, read the letter aloud, then whispered again in a gravely voice tinged with dread. "He controls the microphone. And the cameras," another added. "You walk into his studio, you're not a guest, you're a target." Bumpy sat quietly in his favorite armchair, still, thoughtful, puffing a cigar with slow precision. Smoke spiraled upward like a question mark no one dared answer. They were right, every word. This wasn't an invitation, it was an ambush written in calligraphy. But Bumpy had built his name walking through ambushes and making it out the other side untouched. Turning it down would be weakness, and in Harlem, fear smelled louder than blood. If he declined, the papers would say the gangster was scared of the white man in the suit, and Bumpy Johnson wasn't about to let that lie breathe. "I'm going," he said quietly. The decision was final, stone-carved. "He thinks he's calling out a caricature," Bumpy added. "What he doesn't know is he's inviting a man who reads Nkrumah, plays chess, knows which fork to use at dinner and which phrase will break a man at the knees." A pause. "Let him lay the trap," Bumpy said, setting his cigar down carefully. "I'll bring the bait." And just like that, the hunter became the one walking into the lion's den, not to roar, but to dismantle the cage from the inside. The day of the interview brought an unexpected chill. Manhattan's wind tore through wool coats and cut across faces like razors. But Bumpy Johnson dressed like a man heading to war with no plans to lose. He chose his suit carefully, a charcoal gray custom-tailored piece, crisp white shirt, silk burgundy tie, each layer a declaration. His polished shoes clicked with purpose. His fedora sat angled sharp enough to slice the air. When he checked the mirror, he didn't see a gangster. He saw a senator, a general, a man who belonged in every room that would rather lock him out. And that right there is what terrified Julian Westbrook the most, an equal. The drive from Harlem to Midtown wasn't just a commute, it was a crossing, one world drifting into another. East 110th Street was the border between souls carved from struggle and lives built on inherited comfort. The brownstones faded behind them, replaced by monoliths of finance and policy. And the faces outside, black and brown, turned white and worried. When the black Cadillac stopped outside Rockefeller Center, the greeting was immediate and cold. The doorman stared like he was waiting for a punchline, His eyes flicked from driver to passenger and back again. His lip curled slightly before he opened the door, wordless and stiff, as if immune to manners. Bumpy stepped out, unmoved. His presence didn't just turn heads in the gilded lobby, it shifted the air. He wasn't a janitor or delivery man, he was dressed like wealth itself, and that broke the unwritten rules of the building. "Mr. Johnson," the receptionist said weakly, her smile sharp with fear. "Mr. Johnson, Westbrook is expecting you. Security will need to check." 2 guards approached. Big men with sharp eyes. One stepped in, chin high. "Arms out," he grunted. But Bumpy didn't flinch. He didn't lift a finger. "Touch me," he said softly, "and tonight your boss has no guest, only questions. And by morning, you'll be looking for work on the docks." The receptionist led them down plush hallways that seemed to stretch forever. Framed portraits of powerful white men stared down like ghosts guarding the walls. News anchors, senators, cultural titans frozen in sepia arrogance. As the group passed open offices, the typing stopped. Conversations fell silent. Stares followed them, full of whispers and warnings. "He's here. That's him, the gangster." They were escorted to a green room, though nothing about it felt welcoming. The walls were an ugly shade of beige, and a bowl of stale fruit sat lonely on the table. The message was deliberate: "You're not a guest. You're a problem we don't want to admit we invited." Bumpy stood, scanning the walls. This room wasn't meant to be prepared. It was designed to shrink him. 10 minutes passed. Then the door creaked open. Julian Westbrook entered like a man stepping onto a stage. In person, he was taller than expected, and every detail screamed curated perfection: pomaded hair, gleaming teeth, a scent of cologne, confidence and casual cruelty. He didn't say welcome, didn't offer his hand. He stood by the door like he owned the very air between them. "Mr. Johnson," Westbrook said. The words dripped with false civility. "Honestly, we weren't sure you'd have the nerve. Had a backup segment on New York's botanical gardens just in case." "I've never been accused of lacking nerve," Bumpy replied calmly, finally turning to face him. Westbrook laughed, flat and hollow. "Well, the streets are one thing. Television, however, has rules. Decorum, decency." Then he stepped close. Too close. His voice dipped into baby talk condescension. "We'll discuss Harlem, numbers, gangs. Try to speak clearly, no slang or jive. Viewers aren't used to your dialect." It was a slap wearing a smile. A racist insult gilded in professionalism. Bumpy's eyes narrowed with interest, not fury. He turned and said, almost playfully, "I'll do my best to be understood, Julian. First name basis, a knife wrapped in silk." Westbrook stiffened. "It's Mr. Westbrook. On air." Bumpy smiled just enough. "We'll see." The moment the door closed, the silence snapped like a rope. Nat Pendergrew, Bumpy's loyal enforcer, stepped forward, fists coiled with rage. "Let me knock those teeth back into his throat, just once." Bumpy raised one hand. No words, just a look. Control. Always control. "He wants that," Bumpy said, adjusting his cufflinks with slow, deliberate care. "He wants the brute, the animal." He glanced at the clock. The countdown had begun. "Tonight, Nat, we don't fight with fists." He straightened his tie. "We kill him with truth. And truth, clean, sharp, and irreversible, hurts men like Julian Westbrook more than a right hook ever could." A knock broke the silence. A stage manager in a headset, barely out of college, poked his head in. "Mr. Johnson, we're ready." Bumpy walked calmly into the studio, into enemy territory. In an instant, the space shifted. Cameras stood like machines of war. Boom mics hovered above like vultures. Blinding lights turned the center stage into a burning ring of fire. The audience, white, waiting, skeptical, sat in pin-drop silence as Bumpy entered. 300 people leaned in, eyes sharp as blades. They weren't here to listen, they were here to watch him crack. Westbrook was already seated behind his polished mahogany desk, the king on his media throne. Opposite him sat a simple chair, wooden, unpadded. Another insult. Westbrook sat in plush leather. Bumpy sat down in the wooden chair like it belonged to him, crossed his legs, folded his hands, unmoved. A makeup assistant hovered, sponge in hand. She started toward him. "I'm fine, darling," Bumpy said gently. "I don't wear a mask." Westbrook heard it. His jaw twitched. The stage manager raised his fingers. 30 seconds, quiet on set. 20. The cameras came to life. A red light glowed mercilessly. Westbrook straightened his papers. "Good evening," he began, voice shifting into performance. "I'm Julian Westbrook, and this is City in Focus." A pause. A pause. "Tonight we welcome a controversial guest, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Some call him Harlem's mayor. Others," he turned, smirking, "call him Harlem's cancer." He didn't know it yet, but he just swallowed his own poison. Julian Westbrook turned to Bumpy with the measured arrogance of a man who believed the script belonged to him. "Mr. Johnson," he said, not wasting a beat, "thanks for coming. Though I'd better check my wallet before we begin." Laughter rippled through the audience, low, ugly, and satisfied. A cheap shot. Westbrook smiled. He had drawn first blood, he thought. Bumpy waited. He let the laughter choke itself quiet. Then, calmly, like delivering a truth too old to deny, he said, "You're welcome to check your wallet, Mr. Westbrook. But I believe you'll find the real thieves in this city sit behind bank desks downtown, not on Harlem's sidewalks." The studio grew still. Westbrook's grin twitched, barely perceptible. He hadn't expected a counterpunch dressed in logic. "Very clever," he said with a dismissive flick. "Let's deal in facts. You claim to be a businessman, a community figure, but records show you run a numbers racket that bleeds Harlem's poor dry. So tell me, how do you justify taking food out of families' mouths just to pay for your fancy suits?" He gestured to Bumpy's ensemble with a curled lip. Bumpy leaned forward slightly. "The numbers game, Mr. Westbrook, is Harlem's version of the stock market. It's a shot at survival in a world stacked against us. And unlike Wall Street, when we lose, we don't get bailed out by Washington." He didn't raise his voice. He made the room lean in. "A woman down here bets a dime trying to keep the heat on, and it's called a crime. A banker swings $50 million and crashes pensions. That's business?" Westbrook scowled. "That's the law. And your business brings violence. People die in your streets, Mr. Johnson. Men kill for you. Do you deny it?" "I deny causing the violence," Bumpy said flatly, "but Harlem's blood runs deeper than I ever could." He stared into Westbrook's eyes. "If we're talking killers, let's include the landlords who let children freeze, and cops who beat teenagers for walking home." He didn't flinch. "I didn't create the jungle, Mr. Westbrook. I simply learned how to survive in it." Westbrook's knuckles tightened around his cue cards. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Bumpy Johnson wasn't defensive. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't breaking. He was winning. So Julian changed gears. "If you're so worried about society," he said, a trace of venom creeping into his voice, "then let's call a spade a spade. You're a parasite wearing silk. You sell hollow dreams to your own people. And face it, Mr. Johnson, you're not an educated man. You spent your youth in prison, not a prep school." He leaned forward, pressing harder. "You're a thug who got lucky. Do you really believe you're qualified to lecture me on economics, on morality?" It was polished condescension, the kind meant to shrink a man down till he fit inside the caricature. Bumpy said nothing. For a full beat, he just looked at Westbrook, silent, still, calculating. Then came the answer, quiet, sharp, immovable. "Maybe I don't have a Harvard degree, Mr. Westbrook, but I've got one from Sing Sing and the streets." His voice didn't rise. "But as for reading, I suspect I've finished more books in a prison bunk than you've touched in your penthouse." The audience didn't react. They were frozen. Even the cameras leaned closer. "You regurgitate a script from a teleprompter. I study history." He turned slightly, eyeing the red glow of the live camera. "And history teaches me one thing. Men like you always believe you own the world until the day it shifts beneath your polished shoes." For a heartbeat, Westbrook's face turned pink. He was losing his grip. The smooth, smug mask began to splinter. Julian had underestimated the man across from him. He had prepared for a storm of curses and threats. What he got instead was a mirror, one that reflected everything he tried to ignore. Hey, quick moment before we get deeper. If you're hooked by this face-off, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that peel back history with power. And let me ask you this. Do you think Bumpy was right to use truth instead of fists? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you were in his shoes, how would you have handled Julian Westbrook? So Westbrook reached for the kill switch, the most personal weapon he had left. He was out of tricks, but he still had malice. Westbrook leaned in like a predator behind a smile. His tone softened, but it was a cruel softness, the kind that hides a blade behind velvet. "Let's not avoid the heart of it, Mr. Johnson," he said, voice low, deliberate. "Let's talk about your family. Let's talk about your daughter." The temperature in the studio seemed to shift. He continued, slicing slowly. "You parade her around like royalty, send her off to private schools, dress her up like you're trying to, wash it all off." The insult hovered, unspoken but understood. Everyone felt it. Westbrook folded his hands, leaning into the final cut. "But we all know the truth. No matter what you buy her, or where you send her, she'll always be the daughter of a criminal. And no matter how many bows you tie in her hair, they'll still see her as a primitive." He smiled, quiet and brutal. "Do you really think, Mr. Johnson," Westbrook paused, savoring the poison, "that your money can scrub your blood off her skin?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Not a breath moved. Even the camera operators had frozen where they stood. The crowd, moments ago laughing and watchful, now sat stunned. That line had gone too far. It wasn't journalism, it was spiritual violence. And still, Bumpy didn't speak. He didn't blink. He went motionless like the stillness before a floor gives way. Westbrook sat back, visibly pleased. He had pressed the red button. Now he waited for the explosion, expected the fury, the curse, the leap over the desk, the final confirmation of every stereotype. Instead, Bumpy reached slowly into his coat. Security tensed. Holsters twitched. No weapon came. Only a silver cigarette case. He opened it, took a thick cigar between his fingers, and struck a match. The flame flared, catching the red in his eyes. He exhaled a thick cloud across the desk. When his voice came, it hit the room like gravel thunder. "You made a mistake, Julian." Smoke curled between them. "You thought you were interviewing a man who needed your approval." Then came the smile, the kind of smile that means someone knows something you don't. "You thought," Bumpy continued, his voice turning quieter, more dangerous, "that I cared about your rules, that I came here hoping you'd treat me with respect." He leaned in. "But what you forgot, Julian, is that we're on live television, which means no one can save you from what's coming next." A ripple of panic hit the booth. The producer screamed into Westbrook's earpiece, "Cut! Cut to commercial! Now!" Inside the studio, Westbrook didn't move. He couldn't. He was frozen in the chair, locked by something worse than fear, uncertainty. He opened a door he didn't know how to close. Bumpy took another drag from the cigar, the ember glowing hot. "You asked me about shame," he said. "Let me tell you a story about yours." Westbrook's face tightened, his mouth parted, breath shallow. "Let me tell you what your own network doesn't even know I know." Gasps cut through the audience. Whatever swagger Westbrook still had evaporated. Bumpy reached into his jacket. Westbrook flinched, hands twitching toward the table's edge. But Bumpy didn't produce a gun. He unfolded a small piece of paper. Carefully, he smoothed it against the polished wood of Westbrook's desk. "You recognize this?" His voice was gentle now, mockingly so. Westbrook squinted. His lips went dry. His hands curled into claws on his lap. "Let me help you," Bumpy said. "There's a man down in Hell's Kitchen, a friend of mine. Everyone knows him. Real low profile, but very specific clientele." He looked straight into Julian's eyes. "Name's S." Westbrook inhaled sharply. He knew S. And more than that, Bumpy now knew that he knew. "S lends to men like you," Bumpy said. Men who live too large, spend too wide. Men who smile on camera and cry when the lights go off. He turned to the cameras at last. And guess what, Harlem, Mr. Mia? Westbrook here, he owes us 50 grand. Gasps. Audible now. You thought you brought me here to confess, Bumpy said, returning his attention to the man across from him. But you're the one with the skeleton crawling out onto set. Westbrook's face drained of color, leaving his carefully applied makeup bold and unnatural, like a mask slipping off in real time. His voice returned as a brittle whisper. Stop. This is slander. You can't. I'll sue. Slander's only slander if it isn't true, Bumpy said, lightly tapping the slip of paper. And this is a receipt, a marker, dated last Tuesday. He let that hang in the air. $50,000, Julian. He leaned back slightly, letting the weight of the number sink into the floorboards. You know what happens to men who don't pay us back, don't you? They panic. They scramble. They manufacture events to boost ratings, to beg the network for a bonus big enough to buy safety. He paused. You didn't bring me here to expose Harlem. You brought me here to save yourself. The audience gasped again, but now it was with clarity. Bumpy wasn't the one on trial anymore. You thought if you humiliated me publicly, brutally, you'd be the star who took down the monster. But you didn't bring a hero to TV tonight. You dragged a junkie in a suit into this chair, trying to trade my name for your debt. He pointed. Not shouted, not cried, just pointed. You're the cancer, Julian. Westbrook was trembling, visibly shaking now under the hot lights, the shame dripping down his forehead in beads of panic sweat. He looked at the camera, then at Bumpy, pleading. But Bumpy wasn't done. You brought up my daughter. The atmosphere dropped into ice. You questioned her pride in me, accused her of shame. Bumpy stood. The creak of the wooden chair was the only sound. He rose like a shadow, swallowing light, towering over the crushed man behind the mahogany desk. He picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and dropped it into Westbrook's lap. My daughter knows who I am. He leaned in, voice low. She knows I don't beg. I don't borrow more than I can pay. She knows my debts are settled in full. And then the dagger. But your son, when he goes to school tomorrow and they ask him what you are? Bumpy smiled. We'll see whose kid carries shame. Cut the feed, Westbrook screeched, voice cracking like ice. QTIT now. He lurched backward, snapping under the weight of Bumpy's words. His leather chair rocked on its hinges, then crashed behind him as he fell, arms flailing, suit crumpling, pride shattering with it. He crawled on polished studio floor, one hand pointing at Bumpy, the other clutching the desk for support. Security! Get him out! Get him out! But no one moved. The audience, the staff, the cameraman, all frozen. Not from shock anymore, but awe. They had witnessed a man come undone. The cameras blinked at last, finally cut to black. A detergent commercial rolled in, jarring and absurd, but the damage had been done. 3 million people had seen the truth. Julian Westbrook, the voice of the city, the symbol of dominance and dignity, now lay on the ground, a tantrum in a tailored suit. The set erupted. Stage managers barked into headsets. Security hesitated, unsure now which man actually posed a threat. That wasn't a guest who caused chaos. They'd seen a king walk through the fire and own the flames. The lead guard stepped toward Bumpy. Mr. Johnson, he said. His voice had changed, no longer commanding, just cautious. You need to leave, now. Bumpy didn't answer. He looked down at Westbrook, now curled, shaking, mascara smudged under his eyes like ash on stone. Then Bumpy made one last move. His hand slipped into his pocket. Westbrook winced, startled, the whole studio tensing one final time. Instead, Bumpy pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He let it float from his fingers. It landed square on Westbrook's chest. For your cab, Bumpy said coolly, since Sal will probably take your car keys now that the gig's up. He adjusted his cufflinks, turned to the door, and walked away. Nat Pettigrew and Whispers emerged like shadows at his shoulders. The three of them advanced through the mayhem like prophets after a revelation. They didn't walk in triumph, triumph walked with them. The audience slowly rose, not in applause, not in anger, just reverence. They hadn't watched a gangster tonight. They had witnessed a reckoning. As Bumpy crossed through the lobby on his way out, the air had changed completely. The same receptionist who greeted him with a tight, fearful smile now stared like she'd seen something she couldn't explain. Her hands trembled at the switchboard. The doorman, earlier smug, condescending, rushed forward without hesitation, grabbing the revolving door in both hands. He bowed, trembling. "Have a good night, Mr. Johnson." Bumpy paused as he passed him. He looked the man in the eye. "You too, son, and next time, don't judge a book by the cover." There was a slight smile then, calm but knowing. Sometimes the cover's expensive, but the pages are blank. They stepped into the cold night air. The wind whipped down 6th Avenue, bitter and sharp, but Bumpy didn't feel it. What he felt radiating from within was heat, the heat of total victory. They slid into the Cadillac. As the door closed, the city's chaos muted. It was near silent inside. No one spoke. Uptown, the rhythm of Harlem was waiting for them. As the car headed north, lights streaked past. They crossed 110th Street again, and everything shifted. Midtown's artificial gloss gave way to Harlem's pulse, unapologetic, electric, alive. And on those streets, people had seen the broadcast. They were standing outside bars and pool halls, eyes wide. Some pointed. Others raised fists. A few clapped, not wildly, but with deep, resonant acknowledgement. They hadn't just seen a TV segment. They had witnessed a man go into the lion's den and walk out with the lion's skin over his shoulder. For years, they'd been painted as shadows, criminals, savages. But tonight, Bumpy Johnson held the mirror to the rest of society and made them look. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. This wasn't a parade or politics. This was a returning war general, a conqueror. But deep in his chest, something shifted. This victory wasn't just about his name anymore. It was about a place, a people, a daughter. It was Harlem that walked with its head a little higher that night. When they reached the apartment, the night outside was still cold, still restless. But inside, it was quiet. Elise was waiting, sitting on the couch, wrapped in her silk nightgown. The glow from the TV reflected in her eyes, soft and distant. The sitcom airing on screen tried and failed to erase what had just unfolded. Bumpy stepped into the room. She stood slowly. Her eyes were red around the edges. Not fresh tears, just the marks of ones that had already fallen. For a long moment, she didn't say a word. Then, "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. She looked at him, the man the world called a criminal. The father the news had just called primitive. "He already hated you," she said. "Now he hates you even more." Bumpy hung up his coat and handed it to Nat, who disappeared silently into the kitchen, leaving them alone. He moved toward her. Slowly, deliberately. "He hated me before I walked into that room," Bumpy said, voice barely above a murmur. "He hated me for breathing, for existing." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "What I did tonight wasn't about making him hate me. It was about making him respect you." Her lip trembled as she looked away. "He said terrible things, yes. He said what he believed." Bumpy nodded. "That's the truth of men like him. The world just saw it, finally saw it." He took a deep breath. "You can't kill hate, baby. It's a weed. It grows in silence, in shadows, but you can shine a light on it bright enough that it withers." Elise looked up at him. He looked back, tired but proud. "Julian Westbrook wanted to throw mud," he said, and he forgot he was standing in a glass house. The phone rang suddenly, sharp and shrill. He didn't move to answer it. They both knew who it would be. The other bosses. The city's suits, allies and enemies alike, trying to understand what had just happened, live on air. But Bumpy didn't care. He was already home. The collapse was fast, brutal, total. By sunrise, Julian Westbrook wasn't just out of a job. He had become radioactive. The network didn't wait. A carefully worded statement hit the wires before breakfast, citing personal health reasons for Westbrook's immediate resignation. No one believed it. His name disappeared from the marquee. His photo vanished from the studio hallways where, for years, he'd stood like a polished statue of trustworthiness. And the story? It caught fire. The newspapers tore through the glittering illusion of Julian Westbrook with glee. The Post ran the headline, "Anchor owes mob 50K." The Daily News followed with, "Westbrook's dirty debt exposed." Even the Times, usually reserved, couldn't resist the story. Every name he dropped to climb was now refusing to return his calls. If Bumpy had slapped him on live TV, Westbrook might have been framed as a tragic victim, a martyr to violence. But Bumpy had done worse. He'd used the truth, and the truth doesn't leave bruises, it leaves scars. Westbrook's apartment? Gone. The mortgage vanished under press headlines. His car? Repossessed. His wife packed the children and left within days, disappearing to her parents' estate in Connecticut without a note. He tried to sue, but the evidence wasn't just damning, it was airtight. No lawyer in Manhattan would touch it. None wanted to cross Bumpy Johnson in open court, especially not after seeing what he did with a microphone. Inside Harlem, whispers turned into roars. And inside every newsroom, everyone suddenly remembered something. Bumpy Johnson didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw a punch. He just spoke. And when the dust settled, it wasn't the gangster who looked like a menace. It was the man in the suit. Westbrook hadn't just lost credibility. He lost the thing men like him protect most: legacy. Years of news, of lectures, of polished lies on air, all cracked in 30 minutes of live television. And outside Studio 6B, one message remained: don't bring lies to a man who lives by his own code. 3 weeks later, Bumpy sat inside the Flash Inn, fork in hand, steak on his plate, wine glass half full. The air smelled of tobacco and jazz. Cold rain tapped on the windows as John Coltrane played from a battered jukebox in the corner. Harlem was warm tonight, not in temperature, but in spirit. Whispers walked in, dripping from the storm. Umbrella in one hand and a smirk on his face, he slid into the booth across from Bumpy, poured a drink, and leaned in. "You hear about Westbrook?" Bumpy didn't look up. He cut into his steak with the calm of a man who already knew the answer. "I don't keep up with gossip," Whispers. "Wasn't in the gossip columns," Whispers said, grinning. "Saw him myself. Downtown. Port Authority. Outside some deli. Yeah? Look bad, Bump. Real bad. Outside some deli. Yeah? Look bad, Bump. Real bad." Wrinkled suit, face like he hadn't slept in days. He tried to get in a card game. They tossed him out, said his credit was trash. Bumpy paused, chewed slow, smiled. "Did he ask for me?" "No." Whispers sipped his drink, but he kept looking over his shoulder, like he thought you sent someone to finish the job. Bumpy shook his head. No need to finish something already done. He dabbed at the corners of his mouth with a napkin. Julian lived for the stage, the audience, the chair. Take that away? He shrugged. He's already dead. Just a ghost haunting the city that forgot his name. Whispers chuckled. "Still, though, that thing you said," he leaned in with a grin. "My daughter sleeps soundly. Does your son?" He slapped the table once, still laughing. Cut straight through him. "The boy's still talking about it. That was legendary." Bumpy looked outside. People passed in the rain, struggling, surviving, many still fighting to believe they mattered. "He asked the wrong question," Bumpy said quietly. Whispers blinked. "What do you mean?" "He asked if Elise was ashamed of me." He tilted his glass. "He should have asked if I was afraid." Whispers leaned in, curious. "And what is the truth, Bump?" Bumpy met his eyes, steady, calm, and sharper than ever. "The truth is," he said slowly, deliberately, "I ain't afraid of police. I ain't afraid of the Italians. And I sure as hell ain't afraid of some man with a microphone." His voice didn't need to rise. It carried like scripture. "The only thing I fear is a world where my daughter thinks she has to lower her head to anybody." He finished his wine, set the glass down gently, like final punctuation. As long as I'm breathin', that world won't exist. He reached for his coat, flipping his fedora between his fingers before resting it on his head. Come on, he said, sliding out of the booth. We've got work to do. The numbers don't run themselves. Whispers rose beside him with a low chuckle, grabbing his umbrella. Oh, and I heard, Bumpy added with a smirk, S might be looking for a new customer over in Hell's Kitchen. Whispers raised an eyebrow. You think Julian's gonna crawl back to him? I think, Bumpy said, walking toward the door. There's a vacancy in the broadcasting business and a stain on Westbrook's name that won't wash off with money or tears. They stepped out into the Harlem night. The rain still fell, steady and cold, but Bumpy moved through it untouched. Nat joined at his flank. Whispers followed behind. The three of them slipped into the street, leaving puddles and glory in their wake. Back downtown, Julian Westbrook was just another whisper, faded, forgotten, beaten by a better man. Because on that night back in '65, he came for the king. He missed. And he didn't just insult a man, he insulted the man's daughter. And in doing so, he reminded the world that if you step to Bumpy Johnson, you better pray you don't bruise the crown. So when the cameras cut and the city moved on, one thing stayed. The reminder that power doesn't always wear a badge or a suit. Sometimes it walks in silence, speaks only when it matters, and defends what matters most. Now I want to hear from you. Was Bumpy's approach the ultimate revenge? Or did he go too far? Would you have stopped where he did, or taken it even further? Let's talk in the comments. This story belongs in the kind of conversations we all should be having. And if stories like this stir something in you, if you felt that drop of power in your chest when Bumpy said, "My daughter sleeps soundly," does your son? Then don't leave without hitting that like button, subscribing, and turning on the bell icon, so you never miss the next legend, the next reckoning, the next king who refuses to bow. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, and remember, you can come for the crown, but you better not miss.